You already know this story, or at least, I mean, you think you do. Picture it. You are entirely alone in the middle of the open ocean.
Right, just completely isolated.
Exactly. It's December, the air is frigid, the water is this deep, unforgiving gray, and drifting out of the mist ahead of you is a ship.
Just kind of appearing out of nowhere.
Yeah, a 19th century sailing vessel, and it is perfectly intact. She is doing everything a ship is supposed to do. She is floating, her sails are set to catch the wind, her cargo is securely stowed down in the hold.
Everything looks completely routine.
Totally routine. But as you draw closer, you realize there's absolutely no sound coming from her decks, no shouts from the crew, no footsteps on the timber, so you board her.
Which is pretty brave, honestly.
Right. You step over the rail and the silence is just deafening. You walk down below decks, the wood is creaking beneath your boots. A door is just swinging open and shut on its hinges.
That classic ghost ship imagery.
Oh, absolutely. And there, in the main cabin, you find it. A meal, still laid out on the dining table. The plates are perfectly set, the food is still warm.
Like they just sat down to eat.
Exactly. And next to a pushed-back chair, there is a cup of tea that has just gone cold. Beside it, the captain's pipe, still softly smoking into the air.
It's such a vivid picture.
It really is. It looks as if someone had risen mid-bite, pushed back their chair, and simply stepped right out of the world. Everything is exactly as it should be, except that every single living soul aboard has vanished into thin air.
No sign of a struggle at all.
Nothing. No struggle, no blood, no reason, just a pure ghost ship. The legendary Mary Celeste.
It really is a masterpiece of a story, you know. It has survived for over a century and a half because it is just, well, one of the most perfectly constructed mysteries in the world.
Okay, let's unpack this, because almost every single detail I just told you is a complete fabricated lie.
Every last bit of it.
Yeah. There was no warm meal on the table. There was no cup of tea. There was no softly smoking pipe left behind in the cabin. The ship wasn't even called the Mary Celeste.
That's the part that always gets people.
I know, right? Most of what you and I and everyone else, quote-unquote, knows about this famous ship was completely invented. So today's deep dive into our sources is going to strip away a century and a half of beloved fiction.
To reveal the actual truth, which is so much more interesting.
Yes, the truer, far sadder reality of the most famous empty room in history.
And, you know, this deep dive is going to be a bit of a change of pace from the historical disappearances we typically analyze.
How so?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of historical mystery, say, the Lost Franklin expedition or missing mountaineers on Everest, those stories almost always end in violence or just wrecked environments.
Right, you find broken gear, signs of freezing desperation.
Exactly. You find shattered sledges, torn tents, frozen remains. They carry a very specific kind of forensic dread. But the true horror of Mary Celeste, and it is Mary, by the way, not Marie, is its sheer uncanny normalcy.
Uncanny calm. I love that phrase.
It fits perfectly. We are looking at a self-contained hour centered on one ship, one night, and a mystery you can literally hold in one hand.
You are about to see how easily a real human tragedy gets overwritten by a ghost story, and why the truth is actually much harder to stomach.
Because it's so much more grounded.
Right. Because the scariest part isn't that a sea monster attacked the ship. The scariest part is that everything was ostensibly fine and 10 people vanished anyway.
Which is terrifying in its own way.
Completely. But before we get to the actual forensic evidence of 1872, we have to deal with the person who polluted the crime scene. We have to look at the author of the illusion.
Right, because the disappearance itself happened in 1872. But the ghost ship myth we all picture today, that was born 12 years later in 1884.
Okay, so who started it?
Well, it was a struggling 25-year-old medical doctor living in South Sea, England. He was just trying to supplement his pretty meager income by writing fiction.
That's like a lot of writers, honestly.
Very true. So he submitted a short story to a magazine called the Cornhill Magazine. It was titled J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. It was published anonymously, but the author was a young Arthur Conan Doyle.
Wait, really? Here's where it gets really interesting. Arthur Conan Doyle, the man who goes on to invent Sherlock Holmes.
The very same.
That is wild. He's the literary godfather of deductive reasoning, forensic science, absolute factual truth. And yet, before he creates the ultimate detective, he essentially takes a real-world maritime tragedy and buries the facts under a mountain of sensationalized fiction.
He completely dressed the set. He invented the untouched breakfast. He put the smoking pipes on the tables.
And just made it all up for drama.
Entirely. He created a wildly lurid, bloody tale involving a vengeful mutineer and a racially charged murder plot. It was pure Victorian melodrama.
Wow. So he took the bare bones of a very real, very quiet maritime mystery and just injected it with all this pulp fiction energy.
Exactly. And the most enduring piece of his fiction is actually the title of the ship itself. He changed the name from Mary Celeste to Marie Celeste.
Why did he do that? Just a typo?
It was likely a stylistic choice, to make it sound slightly more exotic for his British readership, or perhaps a minor attempt to distance his fictionalized account from the real vessel.
Oh, that makes sense. A little bit of legal distance, maybe.
Right, but that tiny shift is the ultimate proof of his influence. Whenever you hear someone call it the Marie Celeste, you know immediately that they're reciting Conan Doyle's fiction, not the historical record.
It's the ultimate tell. But what baffles me is how the public just swallowed it. I mean, he published this in a literary magazine. It was clearly marked as a short story, wasn't it?
It was, but it was presented in this very realistic epistolary format. It felt like a true confession.
Even so, it was so vivid that the British consul in Gibraltar actually requested an inquiry because he thought this fictional story might be a real confession from a survivor. Why did the public just decide, yes, this is the official history?
That reaction gets right to the psychology of the myth. Knowledge is valuable when understood, but vacuums of information are terrifying to the human psyche.
We hate not knowing things.
We really do. We abhor a vacuum. For 12 years, from 1872 to 1884, the public had lived with an unsolvable void. 10 people vanished from a perfectly sound ship, and absolutely nobody knew why.
That absence of reason is deeply unsettling.
Exactly. When Conan Doyle came along and provided a narrative, even a sensational, clearly fictional one, it filled that void. The public preferred a lurid, violent explanation over the agonizing silence of an unsolved mystery.
It's as if someone wrote a fictional internet creepypasta about a real missing persons case.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right. Imagine if someone invented, like, a Slender Man figure to explain why a hiker vanished in the woods. And 100 years later, everyone assumes the monster from the story is literally documented in the official police report.
That is exactly what happened here. The fiction just entirely strangled the facts.
People want a neat narrative with a villain they can point to. They don't want to hear that sometimes people just disappear.
And by imposing that fictional narrative, society effectively erased the real human beings who were on that ship.
They just became props in a ghost story.
Precisely. They replaced them with generic characters. To understand the true stakes of this voyage, we have to deliberately put those real people back on the deck. We must rebuild the real ship and reintroduce the real family.
Let's start with the vessel itself, because the ship actually had a life long before it was ever the Mary Celeste. It was originally named the Amazon.
Right. She was built in Nova Scotia in 1861 at Spencer's Island. She was a brigantine.
For those of us who aren't sailors, what exactly is a brigantine?
It's a two-masted sailing vessel. They were the absolute workhorses of mid-19th century maritime trade. She was roughly 100 feet long, built of solid timber, designed to carry heavy cargo across the Atlantic.
So she was built to take a beating.
Definitely. But she carried a deeply unlucky reputation almost from the very moment she hit the water.
I was reading about her early years in the sources, and it sounds like a series of unfortunate events, like almost comical if it wasn't so tragic.
It really was. Her very first captain, Robert McClellan, fell ill and died within days of registering the ship.
Just right out of the gate. And then on her maiden voyage, she suffered structural damage in a storm, right?
Yes, and it didn't stop there. Later, she collided with a fishing vessel in the English Channel and eventually ran aground off Cape Breton in Nova Scotia.
Wow. And maritime communities were highly superstitious back then, so a ship with a rap sheet like that was practically considered cursed.
Which is precisely why, after she was salvaged and sold to American owners in 1868, she underwent a massive refit. And crucially, she was rechristened the Mary Celeste.
Ah, a fresh configuration, fresh paint, and a new name to shake off the bad luck.
Exactly. By late 1872, she was a robust, heavily reinforced, completely seaworthy cargo vessel, and she was under the command of Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs.
Now, this is where the story really pivots away from the myth. In the ghost story version, the captain is just the vague guy who left his pipe smoking. But everything hinges on who the real Captain Briggs was.
He is central to unlocking the real mystery.
Right. We are talking about a man who was the absolute picture of maritime competence. He came from a long line of seafaring men in Marion, Massachusetts. He was deeply respected by his peers.
He was also a devout Puritan, which informed a lot of his character.
Yes, and a strict teetotaler. He didn't touch a drop of alcohol, which is ironic considering what they were carrying, but we'll get to that.
We definitely will. Furthermore, he was a master mariner who actually owned a significant share of the Mary Celeste.
He wasn't merely a hired hand.
No, not at all. This vessel was his livelihood, his investment, and his personal responsibility. The most important element to understand about Captain Briggs is his profound caution.
Caution. That's the key word for him, isn't it?
It really is. He was not a reckless maverick taking wild risks out on the water. He calculated variables meticulously. He made decisions based on safety, preservation, and logic.
And he had a lot to preserve on this specific trip, because he didn't just have a crew with him. Aboard the Mary Celeste for this voyage was his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia.
A whole family on board.
Yeah. Now, they also had a young son, Arthur, but Arthur was left safely at home in Massachusetts to stay in school. That is a detail we absolutely have to remember for later.
It's a heartbreaking detail, really. Now, bringing a family aboard was not unusual for shipmasters in the 19th century. A captain's quarters were essentially a floating apartment.
Right. I read that Sarah Briggs even brought a small parlor organ on board to play hymns, like she made it a home.
She did. But the presence of his wife and toddler underscores an essential point about Briggs.
Which is?
A man as cautious as Briggs would never have brought them aboard if he didn't have absolute, unshakable confidence in the seaworthiness of his vessel and the reliability of his crew.
Wait, for a listener today, bringing a 2-year-old toddler onto a working cargo ship packed with industrial alcohol sounds incredibly dangerous. Was this really considered totally normal back then, or does it just highlight how utterly confident Briggs was in his ship and his own abilities?
It's a bit of both. It was an accepted practice for master mariners to bring their families, but yes, you only did it if you trusted your ship implicitly. Briggs knew that ship inside and out.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about the crew?
The crew consisted of 7 men. The first mate, Albert Richardson, was a highly experienced sailor who had actually sailed under Briggs before.
So they had a trusted working relationship.
Exactly. The rest of the crew were sailors of German and Danish descent, all considered steady, reliable, and peaceable.
So there were no known malcontents, no troublemakers.
None. No murmurs of mutiny or anything like that before they left.
Okay, so we have a heavily reinforced ship, a cautious captain, his family, and a solid crew. 10 people in total. What were they transporting?
They were carrying 7,701 barrels of industrial denatured alcohol.
So not drinking alcohol?
No, absolutely not. This was highly volatile, poisonous fluid used for industrial purposes, such as fortifying wines or manufacturing. It was bound from New York to Genoa, Italy.
So they loaded this cargo, they battened down the heavy wooden hatches to secure the hold, and departed New York on November 7, 1872.
And as they sailed east into the Atlantic, everything was perfectly ordinary. The weather was standard, the ship was performing well.
Right. Knowing exactly how competent this crew was and how cautious Briggs was makes the state in which they were found deeply unsettling. We have to reconstruct the discovery because the reality of the scene is far stranger than untouched breakfasts.
It really is. So let's jump ahead to early December, roughly around December 4th or 5th.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Another vessel, a brigantine named the Dei Gratia, was sailing a very similar route across the Atlantic. She was under the command of Captain David Morehouse.
And interestingly, Morehouse and Briggs actually knew each other, right?
Yes, they were acquaintances. They'd even dined together in New York shortly before the Mary Celeste departed.
So the Dei Gratia is about 400 miles off the coast of the Azores, out in the open ocean. And Morehouse spots a ship in the distance. He realizes it's the Mary Celeste, but she is behaving completely erratically.
Right, she was yawing.
Yawing. What does that look like?
In sailing terms, this means she was deviating wildly from a straight course, just swinging unsteadily from side to side in the waves.
Because nobody was steering her.
Exactly. When a ship is properly crewed, the helm is manned to keep the vessel aligned with the wind. But the Mary Celeste had her sails partially set in this bizarre configuration, and the wheel was loose.
She was at the absolute mercy of the swells, moving under wind power but entirely out of control.
Morehouse ordered signals to be raised, but of course, received no response. Recognizing the ship and knowing Briggs's character, Morehouse sensed immediate trouble.
He knew Briggs wouldn't just let his ship drift like that.
Never. So he dispatched his first mate, Oliver DeVoe, along with a small boarding party, to row over and investigate.
So the boarding party climbs over the rail. They expect to find the crew sick, maybe, or perhaps injured from a bad storm.
But they find a ship that is entirely seaworthy. The hull is sound. She hasn't been dismasted.
The 7,701 barrels of alcohol are largely intact and securely lashed down below decks. No sea monsters have torn through the hull.
And when DeVoe went into the living quarters, the uncanny calm truly set in. The crew's heavy sea boots and foul-weather gear were still in their quarters.
Which is crazy because it's December in the Atlantic. You don't go outside without your gear.
You really don't. The family's possessions in the captain's cabin were untouched. Sarah's parlor organ was just sitting against the wall. Valuables, including a significant amount of money and personal jewelry, were completely unbothered.
The galley was tidy, with pots and pans properly stowed. No half-eaten breakfast.
Right. None of Doyle's fiction. Just a meticulously kept ship.
But the people were gone. So rather than looking at what was left behind, I want to look at the forensic clues of what was missing. Because the missing items tell a very specific story, don't they?
They absolutely do. It points to a very deliberate action.
First, the ship's single lifeboat, a small yawl that had been lashed across the main hatch, was gone, and it hadn't been ripped away by a rogue wave.
Correct. The boarding party found that the heavy lashings holding the yawl in place had been deliberately undone, and the tackles used to hoist it over the side were deployed.
So they lowered it themselves.
Yes. Furthermore, the ship's vital navigational instruments were gone. The sextant, the chronometer, the compass.
You don't grab those by accident.
No, you grab those when you know you're going to need them on the open water. The ship's register and clearance papers, which a captain requires to legally dock and unload cargo, were also missing.
The only documentation left behind was the ship's logbook. So what does this all mean? They took the compass, the papers, and the lifeboat. You don't do that if a giant squid is eating the crew.
Definitely not.
You don't do that if a sudden rogue wave washes everyone overboard. This wasn't an abduction or an accidental sweep. This was an orderly, deliberate evacuation. Captain Briggs ordered that boat launched and loaded.
It was an evacuation executed by a professional who knew precisely what tools he needed to survive on the open water. But the rationale for that evacuation becomes the central puzzle. Why leave a perfectly sound ship?
Right, and there was one other detail they found which might hold the clue.
The water. The boarding party found roughly 3.5 feet of water sloshing in the ship's hold.
3.5 feet. Now, to a layman, 3.5 feet of water in the bottom of a wooden boat sounds absolutely terrifying. I'd be panicking. But is that enough to sink a 100-foot brigantine?
It is a significant amount of water. It would make any captain nervous, especially in rough Atlantic swells. However, for a vessel the size of the Mary Celeste, it was nowhere near enough to cause her to founder.
She wasn't sinking.
She was highly buoyant and riding well above the waterline. You see, a wooden ship inherently takes on some water during a voyage, which collects in the bilge, the lowest inner part of the hull.
It's just part of sailing a wooden ship.
Exactly. That is exactly why ships are equipped with bilge pumps.
But the boarding party found that one of the ship's 2 pumps had been disassembled. The sounding rod was lying right there on the deck nearby.
Exactly. And to understand the significance of this, we need to understand how a 19th century captain monitors his ship's safety.
How does he do it?
To measure the water in the bilge, a captain doesn't just guess, he uses a sounding rod. This is essentially a heavy metal rod attached to a line.
Okay.
You drop it down a specialized pipe to the bilge, pull it back up, and look at the water line on the rod, much like checking the oil dipstick in a car.
Oh, that makes total sense. So the fact that the sounding rod was out on the deck and a pump was taken apart indicates that someone was actively trying to measure or manage the water level right before they abandoned ship.
Yes, they were focused on the water level at the very end.
Let me add one more crucial detail. The last entry in the logbook was dated November 25th, placing the Mary Celeste near the island of Santa Maria in the Azores.
Right.
But the Dei Gratia didn't find them until December 4th or 5th. That means the ship had sailed for 9 or 10 days, covering 400 miles, completely empty. The wheel was unmanned, and she just ghosted her way across the Atlantic on the wind.
That physical reality, a ship sailing itself for hundreds of miles, is precisely what fueled the supernatural myths. It's an eerie thought.
It really is.
But the human reaction to finding a derelict ship isn't to marvel at physics. It is to look for someone to blame. When the Dei Gratia brought the Mary Celeste into port, They walked directly into a bizarre legal battle.
Because under maritime law, if you recover an abandoned vessel, you are entitled to a salvage reward, right?
Yeah,
You get a percentage of the value of the ship and its cargo.
that is the standard procedure.
So the crew of the Dei Gratia sails the Mary Celeste into the British port of Gibraltar, expecting a paycheck, and instead they get treated like murder suspects.
This brings us to the Vice Admiralty Court in Gibraltar, and specifically to a man named Frederick Sollyflood.
Who was he?
He was the Attorney General of Gibraltar and the Advocate General of the court. Sollyflood was zealous, aggressive, and utterly abhorred a mystery. When he looked at the Mary Celeste, he didn't see an inexplicable tragedy.
He saw a crime scene.
Exactly. He was absolutely convinced that a dark, violent conspiracy had taken place.
You know, I want to push back on this for a second because initially, Sollyflood's suspicion doesn't sound entirely crazy to me.
How so?
While Captain Morehouse finds a ship completely abandoned, he happens to personally know the captain of that ship. And by quote-unquote saving this abandoned ship, Morehouse stands to make a massive amount of money in salvage rights.
It does look slightly convenient.
Right. If I'm an investigator in 1872, I'm absolutely looking at Morehouse. What if Briggs and Morehouse colluded? What if they plan to meet in the Atlantic? Briggs hands the ship over to Morehouse, they fake an abandonment, claim the insurance and the salvage money, and split the profits.
It is a tempting theory, and it was precisely Sollyflood's leading hypothesis. However, when we apply the mechanics of 19th century maritime finance to that theory, it collapses entirely.
Okay, why doesn't it hold up?
First, Captain Briggs was a part owner of the Mary Celeste. The financial loss he would suffer from abandoning his own vessel far outweighed any cut he might receive from a salvage claim.
Ah, so he'd actually be losing money.
Significantly. Second, to execute this fraud, Briggs would have to disappear forever, faking his own death and the deaths of his wife and 2-year-old child, effectively rendering his surviving son back home an orphan.
Wow, yeah. That is dark. No rational man, especially a devout and respected figure like Briggs, commits familial and financial suicide for a minor insurance scam.
Exactly. The human cost is just too high to make sense of the financial motive.
Okay, so the insurance scam is out. But Sollyflood wasn't just relying on financial theories. He ordered a full forensic investigation of the ship to prove there had been a mutiny or a murder.
He really wanted to find blood.
And he actually presented evidence to the court. He found a sword under the captain's bed that had dark stains on it. He found stains on the woodwork of the deck. He pointed to deep cuts on the ship's railing, claiming it was evidence of an axe fight.
This is where we have to look closely at the science of the 1872 Gibraltar hearings. Sollyflood presented these findings as absolute proof of a massacre. The court ordered a scientific analysis of the stains.
Now, in the 1870s, forensic science was pretty rudimentary. They didn't have DNA testing or modern luminol, obviously.
No, not at all. The testing fell to a local physician, Dr. J. Patron. He utilized basic microscopic examination and early chemical reagents.
And what did Dr. Patron find? Did it back up the murder theory?
He completely dismantled Sollyflood's case.
Really? How?
Under examination, the quote-unquote blood on the captain's sword was proven to be nothing more than common rust.
Just rust?
Just rust. The dark stains on the deck woodwork were identified as wood sap and dirt, which is entirely natural to a working timber ship.
And what about the axe cuts on the railing?
They were standard wear and tear from moving heavy cargo over the side of the vessel. Dr. Patron's report concluded there was absolutely zero convincing evidence of human blood or violence on the Mary Celeste.
It reminds me of modern internet sleuths.
Oh, absolutely.
A viral mystery hits Reddit, and we are so uncomfortable with quote-unquote we don't know that we invent massive conspiracies. We analyze pixels in a blurry photograph and say, look, that shadow proves it was a murder.
People see what they want to see.
Sollyflood couldn't accept the mystery, so he literally tried to invent a murder out of rust and wood sap.
And despite the scientific evidence completely debunking his theories, the court remained infected by his suspicion. They couldn't prove foul play, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something nefarious had occurred.
So how did they resolve the salvage claim?
This prejudice is reflected in the final salvage award. The court grudgingly awarded the crew of the Dei Gratia a salvage prize of £1,700, which was only about 1/5 of the total value of the ship and cargo.
Wow, only a fifth.
Yes, it was a notably small reward, basically a silent, punitive statement that the court still suspected they were somehow involved in a crime they just couldn't prove.
It's infuriating for the salvage crew. They do the right thing, save the ship, and get treated like criminals.
It was incredibly unfair to Captain Morehouse and his men.
But let's methodically clear the field of any other villains here. We've ruled out conspiracy because Briggs wouldn't destroy his life for a scam. We've ruled out mutiny because there was zero forensic evidence of violence, and the crew was respected. What about piracy? There were absolutely pirates operating in various parts of the world in the 1870s.
Piracy is easily dismissed by the evidence left behind. The objective of piracy is theft.
Right.
If pirates had boarded the Mary Celeste, they would have stripped her of valuables.
Yeah.
They would have taken the crew's money, the jewelry, and certainly the cargo of industrial alcohol, which had significant monetary value.
And all of that was still there.
None of that was touched. Pirates do not board a ship, peacefully kidnap 10 people, leave the gold in the captain's cabin, and carefully launch one lifeboat.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the fringe geography theories? The Bermuda Triangle.
Geographically impossible. The Bermuda Triangle is a designated area in the western part of the North Atlantic Ocean, bounded roughly by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico.
And where were they?
The Mary Celeste departed New York and was found roughly 400 miles off the Azores, which is in the eastern Atlantic near the coast of Portugal. They were thousands of miles away from the Bermuda Triangle.
Having eliminated the monsters, the pirates, the mutineers, and the insurance scammers, we are left only with the physical evidence.
Which points to a very specific, tragic scenario.
Let's summarize what we have. We have a sound ship, a missing lifeboat, missing navigational tools, 3.5 feet of water in the bilge, a disassembled pump, a sounding rod on the deck, and a cargo of 7,701 barrels of denatured alcohol.
And that leads us to the most probable, science-based reconstruction of events. I must emphasize that this case remains officially unsolved by history, but when we synthesize the physical evidence with modern scientific understanding, a clear, devastating sequence of events emerges.
Let's walk through it. It starts with the cargo.
The cargo is the catalyst. 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol. Months later, when the cargo was finally unloaded in Genoa, it was discovered that exactly 9 of those barrels were completely empty. Not broken, not smashed, just empty.
No, wait. Earlier you said the cargo was perfectly intact. Why were exactly 9 barrels empty? If they didn't break, where did the alcohol go?
This requires an understanding of 19th century cooperage barrel making.
Okay, let's dive into that.
The vast majority of the barrels were made of white oak. White oak has cellular structures called tyloses that plug the wood's capillaries, making it watertight. That's why we use white oak to age whiskey.
So it holds liquid perfectly.
Exactly. But the 9 empty barrels were made of red oak. Red oak lacks these plugs. It has open capillaries, making it highly porous.
So the 9 red oak barrels are literally sweating alcohol.
Precisely. Over the course of the voyage, the constant motion of the ship in the Atlantic swells caused the barrels to rub together. The porous red oak allowed the highly volatile alcohol to leak out and vaporize into the air.
Oh man, picture the environment. It is late November, the weather is getting rough. Captain Briggs has ordered the heavy wooden hatches battened down tightly to keep the seawater out. That means there is absolutely zero ventilation in the cargo hold.
Not at all.
You have a sealed, dark, wooden cargo hold slowly filling up with highly explosive alcohol fumes. If you are a captain and you start smelling those fumes seeping up through the floorboards, your immediate thought is, we are sitting on a bomb.
You'd be terrified. One spark from a galley stove, one drop's lantern, or even the friction of the barrels rubbing together in a storm, and the entire ship is blown to splinters.
Just a floating powder keg.
The sheer volume of the fumes would be enough to trigger extreme alarm. Some historians even theorize that a minor shift in the cargo or a sudden change in atmospheric pressure might have caused a low-level rumble or a venting of fumes that blew off a hatch cover, terrifying the crew.
I can totally see that. But even without a physical explosion, the overwhelming stench of the vapors signaled imminent catastrophic danger.
Yes. So Briggs realizes the ship might explode. But he doesn't just abandon ship immediately. He is a cautious man. He goes to check the integrity of the ship.
He goes to the pump.
He needs to know if the ship is taking on water. Perhaps he fears a minor explosion below decks has already breached the hull, or he's concerned the rough seas have caused a leak. He goes to take a sounding of the bilge water.
But remember the boarding party's evidence. The pump was disassembled, and the sounding rod was on the deck.
This is where mechanical failure and human error collide in the worst possible way. Briggs disassembles the pump to drop the sounding rod down the tube into the bilge.
Okay.
Now, the pump may have been clogged. The Mary Celeste's previous cargo had been coal, and coal dust mixed with seawater creates a thick sludge that can easily foul a pump's valves.
So the pump is just jammed up.
Right. If the pump is clogged, it's temporarily inoperable. When Briggs drops the sounding rod, he gets a bad reading. The water in the bilge, unable to be pumped out, is sloshing violently in the rough seas, making it seem much deeper than 3.5 feet.
In that singular, terrifying moment, Captain Briggs believes two things simultaneously. One, the ship is filling with explosive, poisonous gas. Two, the ship is taking on water much faster than it actually is, and the pump is broken. He thinks the ship is sinking and about to explode at the exact same time.
He believes the loss of the vessel is imminent. And driven by his defining trait, his profound caution, his desperate need to protect his wife, his 2-year-old daughter, and his crew, Briggs makes a fatal decision.
He orders a deliberate, orderly evacuation.
He orders all 10 people into the single small yawl. He gathers the ship's papers, the compass, the navigational instruments. He doesn't gather food or extra clothing because he doesn't intend to go far.
That is the crucial insight. A master mariner knows an overloaded open yawl in the middle of the Atlantic is a death sentence. He almost certainly did not intend to cast off completely.
The leading historical consensus is that Briggs tethered the small yawl to the Mary Celeste using a long line. The ship's main peak halyard, a heavy, thick rope used to raise the sails, was found mysteriously missing by the boarding party.
He tied his small boat to the big ship.
Yes.
It's brilliant. It's exactly what a smart, cautious captain would do. You get your family off the floating bomb, but you don't let go of the ship. You let the yawl drift a safe distance behind the Mary Celeste. You wait. If the ship explodes, you are at a safe distance. If the vapor clears and you realize the ship isn't sinking, you simply pull yourselves back along the line and reboard.
It was a perfectly rational plan based on the terrifying variables he faced. It was the smartest thing he could have done. But then, the tragedy of the wind occurs.
What goes wrong?
While they are trailing behind the Mary Celeste in this overloaded tiny boat, the weather changes. A sudden squall rises.
Just bad luck?
The worst luck. A heavy gust of wind catches the partially set sails of the Mary Celeste. The massive heavy ship surges forward with tremendous force, and the tether line, the rope holding the small yawl to safety, snaps.
The line parts?
The line parts under the immense strain. Or perhaps, in the panic of a sudden storm, someone in the yawl cuts the line to prevent the small boat from being dragged under the water by the momentum of the massive ship.
Either way, the physical connection is severed.
Yes. The Mary Celeste, uncrewed but perfectly buoyant, pulls away. She rides the winds for another 400 miles, completely empty. A ghost ship created not by a curse, but by physics and just devastating bad luck.
And behind her, 10 people, including a mother and a 2-year-old child, are left in a tiny, overloaded, open boat, bobbing in the freezing swells of the open Atlantic, watching their only chance of survival slowly disappear over the horizon.
They were never seen again. They almost certainly succumbed to the elements or foundered in the rough seas shortly after.
It is the ultimate irony of survival.
The action taken to avoid death became the direct instrument of it.
I just need to step back and synthesize this because the sheer cruelty of it is taking my breath away. They abandoned the safe thing for the unsafe thing, and the safe thing survived, while they did not. Captain Briggs did everything right based on the information he had in that moment.
He wasn't reckless at all.
No, he was trying to save his family. His caution, his desperate, loving need to protect his 2-year-old daughter is exactly what killed them.
Which brings us back to the core thesis of this deep dive. Why do we prefer the ghost story? Why did the world latch on to Arthur Conan Doyle's fiction of untouched meals and vengeful mutineers?
Because it's easier to digest.
Yes. Because a ghost has meaning. A sea monster has a motive, even if it's just hunger. A mutiny is a story of human greed and conflict. We understand those things. They fit into a narrative structure where actions have understandable, if dark, consequences.
But a leaky barrel of red oak, a misread pump clogged with coal dust, a sudden gust of wind snapping a rope at the worst possible second, those things mean absolutely nothing. It's just the terrifying banality of human error and random chance.
We invented the supernatural fiction. We painted the Mary Celeste as a haunted ship because the sheer, blind randomness of the universe is too terrifying to accept.
We'd rather have a monster than meaningless chaos.
We would rather believe that dark, spectral forces are targeting us than admit that a perfectly good man can do his absolute best, make a completely rational decision, and still lose his entire family to a gust of wind. The ghost story is a psychological shield. We use it to protect ourselves from the fragility of our own existence.
And in holding up that shield, we did something pretty unforgivable to the victims. We turned their very real, very terrifying final moments into an entertaining parlor trick. We need to remind everyone listening of the real human cost here. Remember the detail we talked about earlier, Arthur Briggs, the young boy who was left safely at home in Massachusetts to stay in school.
7-year-old Arthur Briggs.
He grew up an orphan, his mother, his father, his baby sister, all swallowed by the ocean. And for the rest of his life, he had to watch the world turn his family's devastating tragedy into a cheap, spooky mystery.
It must have been agonizing for him.
He had to hear people talk about smoking pipes and bloody swords, knowing that his cautious, devout father died trying to save his mother and sister. And we have to remember 2-year-old Sophia. She is entirely erased from the spooky campfire tales.
You never hear about the toddler in the ghost stories.
Never, because a terrified, freezing 2-year-old drowning in an open boat ruins the fun of a ghost ship. It makes it too real. It makes it hurt.
The erasure of Sophia Briggs is the ultimate indictment of the myth. When we prioritize the puzzle over the people, we lose our humanity. The Mary Celeste wasn't a haunted house. It was a crime scene of chance. It was the site of a profound familial tragedy.
We did exactly what we set out to do today. We stripped away 150 years of fiction, we took back the most famous empty room in history, and gave it back to the people who actually lived and died in it.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. The next time you hear a legendary mystery, the next time someone tells you a spooky story about a vanished crew or an inexplicable disappearance, ask yourself, what human truth is this story trying to hide?
That's a great question.
How many other historical, quote-unquote, ghosts are just our way of refusing to look at the terrifying fragility of our own lives?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into our sources, because sometimes the most profound discoveries are made simply by clearing away the fiction and having the courage to look at the empty room underneath.